this seminar. We had a lot of interest the first year, so we decided to do another session this year. And we're going to try to keep each of our presentations as short as possible, so that way at the end we can have enough more time for question and answer. So that's our plan. The first thing I want to talk about is, so in 2012 I wrote a blog post about the top 10 ways on how not to build a mosque in America, and that was based on my 3 or 4 years of experience in volunteering in my local masjid community project in San Jose, California. And that blog post kind of went a little bit viral because a lot of people saw a lot of common themes, and that's how I got to meet Christopher McCoy, who's one of the architects here. So we kind of came to some similarities on a lot of our projects. So the first one I want to talk about is this one called the Alavi Muslim League. It's in Hayward, California. Some of the pictures here are from before the construction happened. So just a brief history about that project. So it was a local small Fiji community in Hayward, and they had this office building that they owned, and they were using it for about 7 years as a masjid. And the interesting thing is they had no problems with the neighborhood or anything for 7 years. But then one day, one of their members parked illegally in a neighbor's parking lot, and that neighbor happened to be a lawyer. So the lawyer sent a letter to the city, and then the city came back and said, hey, you don't have a use permit to use this place as a masjid or a religious assembly. So basically the city said, hey, either you got to apply for a use permit as a religious assembly space, or you have to shut down the masjid. So that's why they contacted us, myself and one of my associates in the Bay Area. So we helped them to basically legalize their facility. So a couple of points I want to bring up here, as I mentioned earlier about the good relations with the neighbors. If you have any kind of project, the first thing you should do is before you embark on the project, you should make sure you have good relations with your neighbors. Because whenever you do any kind of construction project, it goes to the city, and then there's usually a public hearing, and the neighbors come. So you kind of want to get ahead of that and make sure you have good relations with your neighbors. The other thing is don't build anything without a permit. In this particular case, they did a lot of interior renovations to the space without any permits. And then the last thing is inform the architect before making any changes. So as you can see, we kind of opened up the space. We added some windows, and outside we added some wudu area. So now it's all legalized and everything is good. The second project that I want to go over is in San Jose, California. It's called the Evergreen Islamic Center. So this one is a 2-acre piece of land in the foothills of San Jose. And the one big major issue is that when people look for land, they usually just think about the building costs, and they don't think about the site preparation costs. So in this particular case, it was a very steep slope. So when the masjid board, they got one estimate from one contractor who just gave a verbal estimate, nothing on paper, of course. And they said, yeah, it's going to cost $1.4 million to build a masjid there. And he was actually pretty close to the building cost, but he did not take into account the site grading cost, which is another $1 million. So altogether, that's over $2 million. So obviously, they didn't find that out until way further in the project. So you got to look at the site cost and everything ahead, and you should get at least. I always tell people get 3 estimates for whatever you do, even if you're doing a bathroom, kitchen remodel in your own house. Get 3 estimates, because that way you can see. Okay, one person is saying 10,000, one saying 20,000, one saying 50,000, and you can get an idea of the proper cost, right? So this is the current view. When I started in the project, it was 2006. And now it's 2015, they're still not done, but they're getting close, alhamdulillah. And really quick, I just want to mention one thing about volunteers. It's always good to have volunteers on your project, but you cannot rely on volunteers. There's a difference between a hired person and a volunteer. A hired person, if they're not doing the job, you fire them, you can get rid of them. A volunteer, as we all know, it's very hard to get rid of volunteers sometimes. They just stick around, and even if you don't want them to help out. So always go for the hired professional. He's going to save you in the long run, money and time. So I'm just kind of going really quickly because we want to give everybody a chance, and then inshallah at the end we're going to have a lot of question and answer time. Thank you very much.
Before our next speaker, I just want to make you aware there is a piece of paper probably near you that has a bio and also has contact information for all of our speakers. And what I'm going to do when I introduce the next speaker, I'm going to leave it down here, so if you don't have one of these, you can come up front and pick one up. Our next speaker is Saaema Alavi, and she is an architect, and she works now actually with a consultant firm for the O'Hare Airport. She is a native of Chicago, born and raised in the southwestern suburbs. She graduated from Illinois Institute of Technology's School of Architecture in 1995, and she's been practicing architecture since that time. She's married with 2 kids and very active in the Chicago community, and she has been active in the conceptual design and master plan of 2 masjids here in the Chicago area.
Thank you, Dr. Irfan, for that brief introduction. So, assalamu alaikum everybody. Welcome to ISNA's 52nd annual convention back in Chicago. It kind of goes back and forth, and we're happy to see it back here in Chicago again. So as he mentioned, being a native, born and raised in Chicago, I've seen Chicago's transformation, and I won't tell you my years of life, but in the 2, 3, 4, 5, maybe 4 decades of life that I've been around, and I studied, as he mentioned, at the Illinois Institute of Technology, which is also located on the south side of Chicago. I was born on the south side of Chicago, so you always go back to your roots. During my studies, we learned extensively about the deep-rooted history and legacy of architects who have graced the city with its elegance, beauty, and sophistication. Just as the city has ordained its dwellers, for centuries, inhabitants and followers of Islam have been worshiping their Lord in cities across the Arabian Peninsula, stretching from east to west across the seas. As my fellow colleagues will address specific topics pertaining to actual mosque construction and implementation, I'd like to focus a little bit back about going back to our roots and follow the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, and what's really important on the foundation of how we design our mosques moving forward. What's important to acknowledge, what we really need to acknowledge, is distinguishing between deen versus culture. We should not be blurring the lines between our religion and what was prescribed to us in our religion. Once we separate these 2 platforms, we'll be able to better plan our mosques, stemming from conceptual design through construction and occupancy, inshallah, whether it be a renovation or a new construction project. So going back to our roots, you can see this image, you see the 2 images on the screen depicts the simplicity of the very first masjid located in Medina, Saudi Arabia. The Prophet's Mosque ﷺ, from the very first day, served as a community center. It was a community center with multifunctional purposes. Roles of the mosque included not just the congregational 5 daily prescribed prayers, but it also had other religious, social, political, and administrative functions. It was utilized as a center for welfare and charity, detention and rehabilitation, medical treatment and nursing, as well as a place for leisure activity. Architecturally, what we see are three converging elements: form, function, and people's needs. During the time of the Prophet, peace be upon him, space was adequately allocated amongst men, women, and children. Men typically prayed in the front, women typically prayed in the back, and children were pretty much sandwiched in between the two, men and women. All were able to worship their Lord under the same roof and domain without any barriers, and the children also acted somewhat as a buffer or a barrier between the men and the women. The command for prayer wasn't gender specific, it was universal. The impact of the mosque as a complex became the core for the city of Medina, and as such, the city grew in a ring-like form centering around the masjid. Form and function is an essential component that the Prophet ﷺ introduced Muslims to at a very early stage of Islam, especially in its early stages of development. The social fabric of the mosque was made up of its people, and this is what we should be striving for right now. It's very un-Quranic for a believing male to ignore a female guest standing outside of a mosque. It should feel unconscionable for a believer to pray while knowing other believers are barred from serving Allah inside the masjid while ample space remains. And it's rightful right for all people. It should be known that every mosque must give equal rights to women for spaces, as these rights are an amana, or a trust, and God given in the Quran. So keeping in mind some of the things we just talked about, there are guidelines and principles that we can follow to help design and plan for all-inclusive spaces within our masjid or mosque facilities. Women should be welcomed and encouraged to attend the masjid with their children. Women should have a prayer space in the main musalla, which is behind the lines of men, that is barrier-free, in order to be in harmony with Quranic principles and the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, and this will also allow for them to view the Imam. Women should have an allotted prayer space, creating a buffer zone in the prayer hall or a separate adjacent space to the main prayer hall to accommodate women who would like to have a barrier. Each individual should be welcomed as a guest and treated as such, with courtesy, adab, harmony, and respect extended by Allah Azza wa Jal. And lastly, we should design our masjids to include programmatic components with the intent of bringing them back to serve as a community center with multifunctional purposes, inshallah. Jazakallah khair. I'm going to now hand over my presentation to my colleague, Chris McCoy. Assalamu alaikum.
Thank you so much. Our next speaker is Chris McCoy. He's my homie in Lexington, Kentucky. Go Big Blue. And he has his own architectural firm. He is a native of Lexington, Kentucky, graduating from the University of Kentucky College of Architecture in 1990. And he performed Shahada and received and became registered as an architect in the same year, 1993. And in that year, he also founded his firm. He actually focuses on designing new mosque renovations, additions, and so forth. He has been the architect for 7 different masjids spread out in the region, in America.
Assalamu alaikum. Thank you for your time with us today. We really appreciate it. As Dr. Hassan said, I became a registered architect and a Muslim in the same week, and it turned out to be sort of poetic. I graduated in 90, and you have to work for a number of years, then become an architect, and I did all that, and it happened to be the same week that I became a Muslim. So that turned out to be poetic justice. You've said enough about me. Let's go on into the work. Some of the first masjids I designed were small, kind of rural masjids in Kentucky. Both of these held 125 people or so. One is in Eastern Kentucky or Prestonsburg, Kentucky. Very, very modest budget, very, very small communities. Alhamdulillah, but they were successful at building a brand new purpose-built masjid, and it was wonderfully rewarding and exciting to be a part of them. The masjid in the lower corner is the Islamic Center of Somerset. They're actually remarkably similar masjids, but obviously by the time I got to the second one, I started making them look better, or making them look more like a masjid. Other things that we do in our practice is master planning, long-term planning. The top photo is for the Islamic School of Louisville, Kentucky. It's four-phase masjid, community center, elementary school, middle school, high school, and recreation facility, all built over multiple phases. And a larger masjid that we designed was for the Islamic Center of Elizabethtown, Kentucky. Again, a 400-person masjid that actually had some planning to it as well, but mostly it was just a new masjid. Actually, that masjid replaced the first purpose-built masjid in the state of Kentucky. Some of the more infamous masjids I've designed that you may have heard of is the Islamic Center of Murfreesboro, Tennessee. There was a lot of news about the people opposed to it, not about the way that it was designed, but about the people that were opposed to that project. We encountered that a lot, particularly in zoning hearings, public hearings. We're quite real versed at handling that situation. But the masjid in Tennessee was also a master plan. Actually, ironically, everybody refers to that masjid as a masjid. It's not. It's actually the multi-purpose hall, which is the lecture hall, that is used as a masjid, function as a masjid, faces the Qibla, has a mihrab, everything. But eventually it's going to be the multi-purpose hall. The big masjid is phase 3 after the school. Proper planning, we'll talk about that, can be very effective. Other masjids that I'm working on a large masjid in Dayton, Ohio that is nearing construction, or nearing the finishing of construction right now. Working on a Bosnian masjid in Louisville, another masjid in Nashville, Tennessee, and a renovation to a masjid in Williamson County, which is south of Nashville in Franklin, Tennessee. This is actually one in Minnesota that we're working on. This is fresh off the boards. Again, it's a large planning project for a 30-acre property for, again, 4-phase, big masjid that can grow from a multi-purpose masjid to a big masjid to a school and other facilities. So we've done many different aspects of masjid design. Some of the key things that I've learned from this is how you organize your community. Yes, you're going to get volunteers. As Irfan mentioned earlier, make sure those volunteers are compensated or at least used. My experience is that they need to have experience doing this. Don't resist the temptation to just get the biggest donors to lead the project. They probably don't have the time or don't necessarily want to. Hire experienced professionals, architects, engineers that have done this type of work. They may not even be Muslim, but they still may be a better professional for you. Keep your building committee both appropriate for your community. If your community includes lots of women, there should be women on the building committee. If they're young adults, great, you include them, but don't let your committee get too large. You've got to be effective in being able to make decisions. Don't put in a token woman just because she's a woman. Get people that matter and count. In my experience, that is much more effective. Money is by far the biggest challenge for us who design and construct masjids. A lot of masjids go in thinking cheap. Oh, brother, we can only do so much. We only have such little money. Every masjid has too little money to start with. You're not the only one that does that. It takes a lot of money to build a building. Masjids are not particularly expensive buildings, but building is. So resist the temptation to downplay those costs to your community. I've seen so many leaders inadvertently, not intentionally doing this, but lying to their community about how much things cost to make it sound good, to appease the donors. Realize there's a difference between pledge and donations, and I just can't emphasize that enough. With regard to specific project issues, understand what you're getting approval for. A lot of people don't, they'll get a zoning permission and they think they can go build a building. That's a whole separate thing for a certificate of occupancy before you can move in. So understand your approvals, and a good professional will educate you on that. Consider renovation instead of new construction. It's unfortunate, but realistic that you can renovate things for half the cost of a new building sometimes, or buy things if they're appropriate as opposed to building new. Resist a rural piece of property way out, inconvenient to everyone, that appears very cheap, because again, as Irfan mentioned, site utility costs, development costs, zoning's a bigger issue out there. It may not be the best choice for you, even though it appears cheap. Don't think cheap, think effective. So, and consider a phased approach, as I mentioned. Recognize the value of multi-purpose buildings. Thank you for your time.
Notice how organized and disciplined they are. This is a wonderful group. Our last speaker is Rahim Akbar. He is an Islamic artist and also a naval architect and engineer. He actually comes from a family of artists who have worked in traditional mosque work. He hails from a Mughal family with a long history in architectural design, woodworking, and so forth. And he has been involved in the design, architectural, interior design. It's in particular the mihrab. I think this is his specialty, in designing mihrabs for 6 different masjids in America.
Assalamu alaikum. Thanks for coming. Thanks for kind introduction. He missed the part that I'm a professional naval architect, which means I design nuclear submarines, aircraft carriers as my proper job. This is just something I enjoy on the side. So, coming from a family of artisans, my grandfather used to build mosques in Sindh. My dad is an architect. He's designed a couple of mosques in Pakistan. I'm a first-generation immigrant, so after spending first 10 years of my life in America, settling down, finding a job, buying a home, I went back to my roots and started designing or doing the Islamic artwork. Here's an interesting story about my first project that I did in North Carolina. That's the masjid in High Point. So this is what the structure was to begin with. I was there one night with my friend. I was visiting him in North Carolina, and we prayed Isha, and we were sitting there, and my friend asked me, why don't you build something for this mosque? I said, okay, that sounds like an interesting project. So we talked about it. I went back home to Houston. I designed something. I built it over the period of 3 months. I created it, shipped it in a freight, and we delivered the product over there on the weekend. In the meantime, the community did not know that it was coming. So one fine evening, they showed up at the mosque, and it was looking like this, and the next weekend it was looking like this. So this was my first project. After that, I got involved with other projects nationwide. This was Institute of Knowledge in Diamond Bar, California. This is 18 feet tall, 13 feet wide, made out of solid mahogany. This is the largest carved wooden mihrab west of Alhambra. This is another picture. You see there's a dome decoration of verse from the Surah Nur, and this was inspired from Hayat Sufi in Turkey. So I'm basically taking the tradition that we had back home. When I say back home, like India, Pakistan, Ottoman culture, and bringing that Muslim heritage in America, because nowadays when you're building mosques, they're looking very plain. So raise hand, how many people have seen mosques with a drywall like this? This is your community standard mosque, right? Okay. How many have seen mosques like this in America? Okay, so this is Phoenix Mosque. So I did this project 2 years ago. So basically my endeavor is to bring our heritage of Islamic art, which spans over multiple centuries, ranging from Ottoman, Turks, Seljuks, Mughals, which were very highly ornate work, and introduced back into our communities here. So it becomes a focal point, and it becomes like a starting point for dialogue when you have interfaith communities visiting. They should see us as communities or people who have association with the art and culture, because we have Alhambra to our history, we have Taj Mahal, we have Mughal Empire. This is a smaller mihrab in Connecticut. So this is an example of what happens if you don't have a proper planning, you have a smaller roof. So it's hard to fit in a nice, beautiful mihrab in a small space. So think about the space. This is a mihrab I did in Westminster, Orange County. This is my recent work, very close to my home. This is Mass KD Islamic Center. This thing is 25 feet tall, 23 feet wide. So now I'll very quickly we'll talk about the decoration process and the concerns and the hurdles that we run into. We should begin with the architectural planning, and we should have a concept in mind that what kind of mihrab or what kind of masjid or what kind of architecture we're going to have. Do you want to have a Mediterranean influence? You want to have a Ottoman influence? You want to have a more Egyptian influence? That depends on what kind of community you have, or you have a more Mughal architecture, so that the designer can bring in those components into your architectural accents. So your beams can be designed that way, so that your mihrab can be designed that way, so your domes can be designed that way. The professional designer is to be hired. Time considerations. 3 months before Ramadan is not a time to order your mihrab. Okay, I get numerous calls every year, 3 months before mihrab, brother, make a mihrab for us, and we want it before Ramadan. Sorry, you can't do that. Okay, money is the biggest issue. Okay, these things cost money. If I were to tell you that the mosque decoration is going to cost you X number of dollars, it's going to give you a sticker shock, people are going to run away. But if I put it in a perspective, it's going to be very easy. And if there's one thing that I want you all to go back and take the lesson from here, that would be that you should allocate only 1% of your whole project cost towards your mosque decoration. So if you're running $1 million mosque, it should be 10,000. Average mosques are around $3 to $4 million. So we should be accounting like $30,000 to $40,000 for decoration process. If anything, you should spend more money on the decoration than your wudu areas. You spend more money in the wudu area than in your main prayer hall. So that's one thing I want you to take with you when you go back to your communities and building mosques, that we should allocate money for decorating the mosque, because this is where your community will be hanging out, this is where your interfaith meetings will happen, and this is what you want to show to the larger people. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you all. And I'm going to ask our brother Irfan to take your questions. We don't have a mic here. You'll just stand where you are and please project so everybody can hear you.
Okay, so we're going to take some question and answer. So unfortunately, we only have one mic. So if you have a specific question for one of us, just let us know. Otherwise, if there's a general question, one of us will answer it. So go ahead.
Yes, I have come to this forum here to hear about some of the mosques have been associated with the government audit. And also the CPA, which I audited many mosques in Virginia, in Teaneck, New Jersey, in many places. And unfortunately, I find as a chartered accountant of CPA, they're very poor in financial management. There's too much politics in mosques between Arabs and non-Arabs. Poor governance, insiders control it, like the House of Saud. I lived in Saudi Arabia for 11 years, so I have some experience. I'll give you the list and then you can...
I'm sorry, I understand your kind of comments, but this is actually about mosque design, so we want to just keep the questions.
I just want to make the point. I want to be directed to the right people to address it.
Why don't you talk to us afterwards? Because right now we want to keep more time for the people who have come here for specific questions about design and construction. So go ahead.
Assalamu alaikum. My name is Ali. Carpet. I'm from Turkey. In Turkey, as you know, the masjid is built in the center of the community, and then itself is created, shape the community. Let's say they put the Turkish bath here, medical center next to it, bazaar, and then they built stores, and then this stores belongs to Waqf, and then this stores actually maintain the whole cost of the masjids. You don't have to pay, and then each stores pay the masjids. What do you think? Can we make it something like that in the United States? Because if we cannot, why? If we can, how can we do that? In the Islamic Center of Irving, they have a huge masjid. I heard they spent $8 million. They have only one store, bookstores, but they can build the stores next to it. That stores can pay off the whole cost of the masjid. The second question is related to this one. As you know, education is very important. How can we expand the message that education friendly? Assalamu alaikum.
Assalamu alaikum. I'll take that first question. I advocate very strongly, and I've been to a couple of masjids in Turkey recently, or at least last year, and I appreciate that comment a lot. We don't see, or at least I don't see, a lot of masjids building facilities that can financially support themselves specifically. Personally, being from here, raised here, I have a real issue with that because it relies upon donations. So I sympathize with your question, at least the nature of it. But in my experience, it's been because masjids are typically built out of donations. Donations are much more effective for masjids, not so much for developments, for retail centers, and sometimes the problem is zoning. Not the problem is zoning, but the challenge is zoning. That the way land is used in some communities, it is very specifically targeted only for one use, and nonprofit rules, and these are often misunderstood by Islamic communities as well, that you can build facilities that support your institution. But masjids masjid projects are viewed as donations, not as developments to invest in. And to me, that's where it lies, is that we as we're developing these facilities, that we think about how we pay for them, because we struggle so hard to raise funds for them. We struggle and we rely upon donations to operate them. So I don't have an answer to tell you exactly how to do that. I can tell you that some of us advocate very heavily that masjids build ways to support themselves. Your second question was about education, and I don't know, I'm the best person to answer that question, and I was fiddling with the computer when you asked it, so does anyone else want to answer that better? How we incorporate educational facilities in the masjid? I think we do as much as we can. I will tell you that in my experience, masjids do a better job of raising money for the masjid and struggle because only a subset of the community may support the school. That's unfortunate. Particularly, there are many, many Muslims that are very passionate about schools, but donations come in stronger for the masjid. In fact, the masjid I'm working on right now in Tennessee is a new masjid next to an Islamic school. It's all run by the masjid downtown. They've had a school there for a while. It's very modest, but they wanted to build a masjid on that property to serve kind of the west end of Nashville. And there's a complete tear right down the middle of that community within itself. Both people are completely supportive of the school, but they're like, we should be building a gym. And then the donors come in and say, well, we're only going to give for a masjid. They don't say it like that, but the donations come in for the masjid, not for the school. Because there are people that feel very passionately and they're willing to put their money in for a masjid, whereas the school already exists, even though the school needs a gym. And you can use a gym as a multi-purpose hall. You can face the gym towards the Qibla and use it for Friday prayers, but then use it weekly for the school. It's a very easy argument for us architecturally to make, but the donors have spoken, and phase one is the masjid, not the gym. So I don't have a direct answer, but I know that communities struggle with that, although there are a lot more people that are passionate about involving education in their facilities. A lot of the master plans I do, almost all of them involve a school, even if it's a after-school program or a weekend school that grows exponentially, or a full-time school. So. Next question.
Yeah, how about adding the banquet hall actually? That can also bring a lot of revenue to that.
I'm sorry?
Banquet hall to the masjid.
Yes. Yeah, that's a good suggestion.
And then you guys are architects, so you can educate the people, because people, when they're designing, they're using only emotions actually. When they're working on the masjid, they think only masjid is going to do the job. But there is a lot of problem once you build the mosque.
Yeah.
So you as a architect, as a educated person, you can tell the people what is going to be in the future.
We do.
That's a good comment. Just to respond to that, believe me, all of us here, we tried our best to. I was on the board of a masjid for almost 8 years in San Jose, so I know how the masjid politics works. It's very difficult to get through sometimes to the uncles. So, but believe me, we really try to educate as much as we can.
Assalamu alaikum. I'm from Indiana. two questions. One is probably more basic question. I see that you are from different parts of the country, and I've seen in your resumes that you've done work in different states. So for an architect, it's not necessary to be, what do you call, registered or something?
It is.
It
It
is,
is.
huh?
Yeah.
So for us to use you out of state, would that be a problem?
No, well,
Go ahead.
I'm sorry, licensure is issued by state, yes, but once you've passed a national test, and you've passed your first exam, or you become an architect in one state, reciprocity going to the next state is often rather a matter of just time and money and paperwork. There's some states that have different qualifications, but it's rather easy. Like I'm registered in 3 states, but I've helped masjids in 5.
Right.
It depends on whether or not I need to be registered. So usually registration is not an issue. It's really a bigger issue when it comes to that designer or architect or engineer understanding what's appropriate for that community. So while we may very well work regionally for, reasons of freestyle versus insulation or, understanding building types and things like that, but typically an architect can work in multiple states.
Right. The second technical question I had, sorry, was that you mentioned about the multi-purpose wall being built, and we are in the process of that. We have not chosen an architect or not, but we had a first meeting about 2 weeks ago, and I'm one of the founders also. So here I want to ask is that, we are, one of the things which we've done is involving our youth in helping us, because 20 years from now, those are the guys who's going to
That's
be...
your target audience, that's right.
Okay, so what I have been struggling with is we are making a masjid with a multi-purpose hall in the basement. Of course, the basement will have appropriate measures to prevent flooding, but I wanted to know for a basketball court, how tall of a ceiling do we need in the basement?
You mind talking to us afterwards?
Afterwards.
It's a specific question?
Okay.
Over 20 feet.
Assalamu alaikum. My name is Syed Imam, and I'm the chairman of the Hickory Hills Planning Commission and Zoning Board of Spiel. I've been over there for the last 15 years. My question is, do you have a booklet or any form of a writing so the people who would like to build a mosque don't really know any ideas? People call me and say, Syed, we want to build and we don't know what exactly goes in. So is there any way, all I give them
Yes.
advice is, the advice
Yes.
I give them is, go to the city hall, look at the zoning ordinance, look at the land where you're going to buy it, make sure that, it is zoned.
You want a step-by-step process?
Yes, sir.
Yeah,
Is
so
there any?
we have some suggestions that we have put together. If you have one of the papers, you can contact us. We can email you. We have some bullet points and lists, and then you can email us for additional questions.
Thank you.
Assalamu alaikum. Thank you, I'm from Minnesota, and it's nice to put a face to the name that you're building our first mosque in Minnesota. So I'm very eager to see how it comes out. We're trying to build our own mosque, and I really appreciate you putting things in perspective. And the perspective is you don't buy a place and then build a mosque. Our process is we looked at the land. The first thing we did is contact an architect and say, hey, can you give us some brief information, how many square footage and what we can do? And then we went to the city, and is it appropriate for zoning or not? I think that part is very important. We get so much excited about building the mosque, we buy a building, and then get stuck with it.
Yeah.
So
And
there's
a lot of communities reach out too late to professionals to get them in the pipeline of
Yes.
answering critical decisions, is the way that I would understand it.
So there is a need, like this gentleman said, they want to build a mosque, how to go about it. The first thing is architect, not the city, in my opinion. The second thing is, my architect told me, if you build it, it's going to cost you between $150 to $200 per square feet. So that is also good to know.
Yeah.
Then, Rahim, I have a question for you. A lot of masjids wants to build a mihrab. So is it okay if we send to you, here's a PDF, or here's the layout of the space, and this is the space you want to put a mihrab, and you say, okay, here's a contemporary design, here's a Turkish design, here's this design, if it is 20 by this is the approximate cost.
Right.
I think there is a need for that.
So that's how I take my projects. Like, people contact me through my Facebook or by word of mouth, and it starts with exactly like with the picture and dimensions.
Right.
They give me that. I propose them. Here are 2-3 different solutions, and the client drives the design selection process.
That is a very good process, and I think we need to have that process at the end of architect too. It doesn't cost us anything. We just give a proposal. Doesn't take much of your time.
Well, it does take a lot of time on our side to come up with multiple designs. So what I find happening is usually this discussion starts to go in a very big, broad path. You know, you give them 2-3 designs, they want to see 3 designs of the third design.
No,
You know?
that they have to make. That they have to make.
Yes, but yes, that's how we should approach these projects.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's a good point. I just want to summarize that, what he said, that before you buy any land, before you buy any building, talk to an architect or an engineer or some professional to check it out. Go to the city. You can always talk to the city ahead of time and just get input on them to see what the process is and if you're allowed to do it, if it's zoned for religious assembly. Sometimes people don't understand the process of a use permit and zoning. Basically, when a building is designed, it's designed for a specific purpose. And for example, an office building has different requirements for exiting in an emergency. Like the number one issue for any building across the whole world is fire safety. So if you're in a religious assembly, you have more people in a certain area, so you need more exiting. So that's why a religious assembly space has different requirements, and you have to get a specific permit, use permit for a religious assembly, because in case of an emergency, you have to have a certain number of exits. In an office building, it's less strict, so that's why you have to make sure that, can I have a religious assembly space inside this office building, and what's the process of converting it? You can always convert the use, but you have to know the process before you buy the building. Go ahead.
So, got a couple of questions. I'll roll them into one. Part about Sister Elena, you had mentioned about the balance between sisters' accommodations and everything else. How do you accommodate sisters that, I mean, as much as there's a need for having that inclusive environment for sisters, but how do you accommodate also for sisters that actually need that privacy, that actually don't want to be as inclusive and want that level of separation from themselves?
So that's a good question, and part of it, I kind of mentioned it in the presentation, but I didn't really explain the actual architectural elements and how we could provide such capacities for these different entities and these different women who either want to have the open space, be able to pray behind the lines of the men, and then the women who also want to have somewhat of a barrier, but still be in the space of the grandiosity of the masjid and the mosque and the dome. So there are certain examples that we've seen in the United States, that I've seen certain masjids. I think Irvine, California is one of them that actually creates a buffer zone. They have a low height partition that is like halfway in between the masjids where the women are based to be prayed, where they pray. It's a removable kind of a low height partition, and then some areas have actually chairs that they use, like, you know, they have actual chairs that they use as a buffer. Others have used like sandblasted, you know, glass walls that still penetrate light to come through, where you still have a lot of light and natural, you know, elements to give you the barrier as well as the openness. And then other mosques could actually start providing, of course, like here in Chicago, we have a lot of mezzanine levels for the women, but the women are just tied to go up to the mezzanine. So I can give an example of Islamic Foundation in Villa Park, how it was originally designed. And I've learned this over the past couple of years, is the original design intent for this masjid in Villa Park, Illinois, was to have the women pray behind the men. The women's bathroom is actually designed for the women to actually exit into the main masjid, which has been barricaded and redirected because of how the utilization of the masjid actually turned out to be. And the women were supposed to actually pray behind the men, and only during Jummah were women supposed to go up to that mezzanine level for spillage. But that is not how the structure of, you know, the organization moved forward when using the space. So it was actually designed for a different intent. But there are ways to renovate the existing spaces that we have, and that's where we have to bring in professionals to come in and kind of help manipulate, redirect, or redesign those spaces to help incorporate the women to use those main musalla areas, if possible.
And the other part of my question was that now that so for an entity that's about to start out and engaging in a masjid project, what would, like, you or Brother Rydhan or Brother McCoy, what would you recommend the interview process for selecting an architect and a planner? What should the committee be asking? Before they make that selection, what they should be asking that goes from the RFQ, from the approval stage, how do you identify that a particular planner or architect aligns with what that community is looking for?
Well,
The first question would be that, have you designed a mosque before?
right.
Good question. Okay.
Past experience is really important if they've worked on such a project. So you have experts here already, and they also have probably a good client or colleague reach out base throughout the United States of other architects who have probably worked on similar mosques or renovations that can help out in other various states, who could help identify what components need to be identified moving forward, especially bringing women onto these, these governance panels of the planning stages for what you're doing. So you need to have, like Chris talked about, not a token woman, but you need to have women who have who are stakeholders in the masjid process. And actually, I like how we brought the youth involved. So you have to start bringing some of our young women who are active in our communities to be a part of those panels and governance boards. In fact, we actually have to start bringing a lot more of our youth into the governance of our masjids because they are the future leaders. And we still have our boards run with people who actually started the implementation of some of these masjids from the 50s and 60s still, which isn't a good way of moving forward.
I just want to quickly mention, we have a sign-up sheet, so if you want some more information from any of us, please put your name and email, and we will email you our presentation. We'll also email you additional notes that we have that we didn't cover in detail, and then you can also ask us more questions. Just real quick about the interview process for the architects. It's just like any vendor that you have coming in, or like a job interview. You should interview multiple architects and ask them all the same questions, give you the proposals, and you can compare. And you can talk to us afterwards for additional information. But just like any kind of job interview, you want to interview more than one and see which one is going to work best, right? So that's my suggestion for that. Let's go for someone different here. Go ahead. Okay.
Is any of you involved in the construction side of the business?
Yeah, I mean, so there's a process called construction administration, which is another service that architects provide. Really quick, I'll just quickly mention something. So the architect has different phases of their job. So one of them is the design process. The other part is when you have started the construction, you can hire the architect to do the next phase, which is called construction administration. And what that means is the architect is representing you in working with the contractor. And that's highly recommended.
It's often required anyway.
Yeah.
Usually the designer most states, the states require the designers to stay involved while it's during construction, to track changes, make sure it's built the way it's designed, make sure that all the life safety issues are still carried out.
But in many places it's not required, like California it's not. So we strongly suggest, because the contractor, whoever you get as a contractor, their main goal is to make money. Obviously everybody wants to make money, but their main goal is to have the cheapest possible construction so they can get the most profit. And in this country, the contractors are the ones that are running the industry, and they are the ones who are trying to they try to kick the architect out of the process that we're talking about, because when we're involved, we want to make sure that it's built according to what the drawings say, right? And we're looking out for you. Obviously, this is a difference in the secondary service, but it's highly recommended that you have an advocate, which we do.
So we have a project in Southeast Michigan near Detroit. We have the piece of land is paid for. We have about $300,000 on top of it. The concept design is done. It is approved by the city, but the details of the design, including interior design and all that, they have not been done yet. we are debating, our architect doesn't seem qualified enough to get involved in that aspect of it. And we are debating whether we do our own subcontracting or hire somebody else we trust, like for $2 to $3 million.
That's a good question. So before I let Chris answer that, my suggestion, like the Evergreen project which I showed you earlier, so one of the issues that I have with that one is the masjid is acting as a general contractor, which I highly recommend you do not do that, because you put all the liability on the masjid, and then if anything happens, the subcontractors, they can sue you, they can put a lien on the property, you know, there's a lot of different problems that can happen. So my suggestion is always hire a professional contractor or architect or somebody, and they are the one who's taking the liability, not the masjid. So I highly recommend that you hire a contractor or you hire an architect to design the interior of the masjid or to build it, and do not be the general contractor yourself. Sometimes it's appealing because you think you can save money. Believe me, you're not going to save money. You're going to waste money.
I agree. You're fine.
Can I comment on that?
Yeah, go ahead.
In the construction process, it is desirable to have an architect design and oversee it. It doesn't cost a lot of money for an architect to oversee, and anytime you disperse any money, the architect should sign off on it. So if you must have had a process where they have done the foundation, the architect will verify, sign off. When the four walls are built, architect will sign off, and that's how the money is dispersed, especially if you're taking a loan. Even if it is your money, you should follow that process. That is what we are doing.
Yeah, you mentioned about gym, so now we are losing lots of young people because we don't have a gym. We have lots of Islamic centers. Is there an Islamic gym that will serve all these purposes?
Islamic gym. Islamic gym is the same as a regular gym, I think. You just gotta have a basketball, volleyball. There's no really difference between an Islamic gym and a regular gym.
No, I mean that will
Yes,
used for
yes.
project by Islamic.
What you're getting at is how you multi-use spaces you're already
Exactly.
using, so
But
that you
it
get
looks
the
like a
maximum
gym.
value of your community's investment. Yes, it's challenging with a gym because sports are so large and you need hard surfaces, whereas like a banquet hall and a musalla can mesh a little bit more effectively. A gym that also functions as a banquet hall and functions as a musalla gets tricky. So be realistic, talk to a professional, but there are certainly ways for things to coexist.
All those messages we could go to build
Yeah.
A community gym.
Yeah, that's good.
Well, that would be ideal.
So in terms of the planning side of it, so there's you have the community, like you mentioned, keep the committee small and everything so that it can be more effective.
Yeah.
Yes.
Now, the question I have is that that's still, the committee still is an extension of the community itself. So, and that's where, how do you balance where the community's decisions are supported when you garner that grassroots support from the community so that you don't end up building a facility that the community at large said, hey, this is something these few grand donors.
That's a good question. Here's my experience. I was on a masjid committee as a volunteer for our project. So what we did, we had a small committee, but what we did is during each step of the design process, we sent out to a few select individuals in the community who we know that are involved, and we picked women, youth, and different people who are not necessarily big donors or on the board or whatever, but they're involved in the masjid, involved in the community. We got their input, and then we collected all that information and we gave it to the architect, and so we tried to get input from several people in the community, so that way that we know that we're not just doing what we want. We want to make sure that we get as much input as we can. And what you're saying about not having a big committee, you can't design by committee. That's the problem, right? And then everybody has their own way or opinion on how something should be built. But that's why you have to give the architect or designer some decision-making process that, hey, you let the architect know that, hey, look, if we're going a little bit overboard here, you can direct us and tell us, this is what I recommend as a designer, what we should do, and we go in that direction, because then you get stuck in a cycle and it never gets done.
I have an addition to this comment is, if you give your designers, architects, and artists liberty to use their aesthetic skill, they will come up with a much better solution for your product than if you were to direct them on every single step of the way. And you're going to end up with a product which neither you will like nor will be supported by the architect or the designer.
Any other questions, comments? Go ahead.
I have just a comment. Before anybody hires or wants to build, you need to hire a good architect and a good attorney. And tell all what you want to the attorney and the architect. You go with them, don't talk too much about it. Let the attorney and the architect do the talking. What happens is, when I've been sitting many times, I see they come in and they start saying, no, we don't. And the attorney and the architect looks at you like, what are the, then we get confused.
Yeah.
So the best is
Yeah, that's a good point. Actually, I forgot to mention in my presentation is that when you have a set of drawings, that's considered a legal document. So the architect is the legal owner of that document. So you cannot make any changes without the architect's permission. And then, like you said, the architect is kind of like your lawyer if you go to court. So the city is kind of like the court, and the architect is like your lawyer. So when you're communicating with the city, the masjid should not directly talk to the city. You should go, just like if you're going to court, you don't talk to the judge directly. You should go through your lawyer, and that's your stupid.
A zoning hearing is not a time for outreach.
Yeah, and just like he said, so you always let the architect represent you, because he's the one who knows all the legal language, design and construction in the court of the city and the county. So, he's your representative, or he or she is your representative, and let them talk for you.
Thank you very much, panel. I really appreciate it.
Any other questions?
Comment about that handicap and like accessibility, and like most of the places I don't find it.
Yeah, so there's a difference in different parts of the country. In California, it's very strict. It's called the American Disabilities Act, ADA. So most of the time, what we suggest is that you're designing a public building. So the difference between a private residence, which you can do whatever you want because it's your private residence. If you're doing a public building which is open to anyone at any time, can come in and use it, you have to make it accessible to everyone. That's the law in most states. I think it's a federal law too now. So basically, you have to have accessible bathrooms with handrails, and you have to have a ramp and everything. So what we recommend people is, don't try to argue and fight it. Just do it because that's the right thing to do at the end of the day. We want to make our masjids accessible to everyone. So just, make sure that you get it done properly, and that's what the architect is there to help you get it done.
Don't forget our disabled brothers and sisters in Islam.
Yeah.
In regards to, I know the uncles get Aba for intrusive controlling, but we're standing on the shoulders of the work they've done over the last 40 years. So we're leveraging that value that they've invested of their time. The question I have is that we've talked about the youth, we've talked about having the kids come in, college facilities. How do we prepare for the retired people? I'll retire one day, and I would like so I can be accessible to the masjid. How do we plan our facilities to accommodate senior Muslims and parents who also want to be attached to the
I'm going to let
facilities?
Saaema handle that because she hasn't been answering the question.
Can you repeat that last half of your question?
The last half-
Seniors?
The last half of the question was, how do we accommodate, besides worrying about the kids and everybody else, but we should, how do we make our facilities accommodating to the senior? What are some of the needs of senior citizens, the Muslims that?
Well, so that kind of goes more into activities and how we create social activities for our seniors, right? Is that what you mean? Or are you talking about accommodating
I think
spaces?
both. I think it's not just the activities, it's more so about they'll have different needs of the facilities for the Wudu area. I mean, I can,
Okay,
I can jump into Badoo, I gotta do what I do, but.
So that kind of goes back in time, back into our accessible, yeah, into our ADA, into our handicap accessibility rights and our compliance issues, and how we address washroom facilities, how we address elevators, how we address ramping and everything else, which are going to be part of the building infrastructure once we build these new masjids and these new facilities and these new, you know, recreational outlets. So I think that's part of law at this stage.
I guess you're right, yeah.
But programming is another good issue that we do have to bring into light, because like you said, a lot of these, my parents in specific, I can think of them as being that group or that population who need more activities in the masjid to come back to the masjid and have some kind of invigorating, you know, activity for them to come to.
It can also be addressed at the planning level. You can design assisted living facilities. A lot of other religious communities do this. Muslims forget to include, you know, residential assisted living facilities or just homes built around the masjid. That's not thought of part of the development. So, yes, sir, brother. I'm sorry.
With regards to his comment about accommodating the seniors in the masjid, I've noticed, and I thought this was kind of interesting, in Riyadh, where you have most of the elder men who are hanging around the masjid all day, they've started to build something almost like a back support right in front of the mihrab for the old men to sit down and stay there all day. And even when the salah comes, they stay there and they sit, versus
I know of a
I don't
product
know if
that
they're trying to get pews in or not, but.
I know of a product that we can build a seat right at the end rows. We can build it into the paneling, goes around the edge of the masjid, and it's a fold-down seat. You wouldn't even know it's there. So we don't have to bring in the plastic chairs or the folding chairs. But, you know, they're $250, $300 a piece. And by the time we get down to decorations and things that really matter, all that budget's been cut out. But there are a lot of great ways. Consult your masjid architect.
Are there any other questions? Jazakallah khair for attending our mosque panel talk. We hope to see you again next year, inshallah. If you haven't been able to fill out that sign-up sheet, we have one circulating around. Can you please do so? Jazakallah.